Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we're going to get stuck into the big issues today that need looking at in depth. Nothing's off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company again today is writer and political commentator, a programme favourite, Benedict Spence. And here's what we've got coming up on the show. A warning of apocalyptic food price rises from the Bank of England as fuel bills also go through the roof. With MPs debating the government's response to the cost of living crisis, I'm asking what's behind it and how do we solve it? Plus, a man is found guilty of belonging to a neo-Nazi terror group which plotted to carry out deadly attacks and ignite a race war in the UK. We'll have the full report on that. And the Queen has made a surprise visit to officially open London's Elizabeth line, named in her honour. That's what we're covering in the next hour, among many other topics. But what do you need to talk about? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet the programme @GBNews. First, though, it is time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Foreign Secretary has set out plans to rewrite Britain's post-Brexit trading agreement, changing the rules on how goods enter Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. Liz Truss said the political deadlock in Northern Ireland was very grave and that immediate action was needed to allow power sharing to resume at Stormont. The DUP has refused to enter government unless the existing Northern Ireland Protocol is scrapped. Ms Truss said the government was still open to negotiations with the European Union and that the new measures from the British government didn't break international law.
This is not about scrapping the protocol. Our aim is to deliver on the protocol's objectives. We will cement those provisions which are working in the protocol, including the common travel area, the single electricity market and North-South cooperation, whilst fixing those elements that aren't, on the movement of goods, goods regulation, VAT, subsidy control and governance.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister said there are pragmatic solutions available to resolve the issues.
We can make some changes, I think, to the protocol, which is not the law of the Medes and the Persians. I agree. It's there in Article 13.8 that if things aren't working, you can change it. Plus, it makes it very clear on the face of the text that you should ensure the East-West trade and the integrity of the UK internal market. So let's fix it.
Volunteer police officers will be given the power to use tasers under new plans by the Home Office. There are nearly 9,000 special constables in England and Wales. They undertake the same duties as regular police officers. Amnesty International has called the move dangerous, saying misuse of tasers can lead to harm and even death. The Home Secretary, though, says the measures will ensure volunteers are not at a disadvantage when facing knife attackers or terror threats.
We are absolutely making sure we do everything we can to equip and empower our officers, frontline officers. I made a taser announcement almost 2 years ago now for police officers, along with the money, resourcing and training. And now for specials in particular, the choice is of course down to chief constables, and I would urge those chief constables to work with us on the resourcing and the training for these special constables.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted Nordic states to reevaluate their security. In the last half an hour, Finland's permanent parliament has approved a proposal to apply for NATO membership. Sweden's also made a formal bid to apply to join the alliance, but it's not yet been approved. Both countries need each of NATO's 30 members to approve their applications. The founder of a far-right terror group whose members plotted to carry out deadly attacks has been found guilty of involvement with the organisation. 27-year-old Alex Davies set up National Action 9 years ago and continued to associate with the group and its offshoot organisations after it was banned by the government in 2016. It follows 19 other convictions of those who continued their membership after the group was outlawed. In Ukraine, the Deputy Prime Minister says the country is working on further stages of evacuating fighters from the steel plant in Mariupol. More than 260 servicemen have already been evacuated from the besieged Avastal steelworks. Some are injured and have been taken to hospital in a Russian-controlled town. All evacuees will be subject to an exchange. Michael Ryan has worked in NATO policy and told GB News he thinks it's likely Moscow's trying to show goodwill to improve their negotiating position.
I would expect that there will be a prisoner swap. The Ukrainians have a significant number of Russian prisoners. The Russians would not be able to argue away in the style of propaganda that they're used to what would happen to these soldiers if they're not brought back alive. And so I would definitely see a transactional prisoner swap.
Television writer Kay Mellor, who wrote the series including Girlfriends, Band of Gold and The Syndicate, has died. Leeds-born Mellor created the drama Children's Ward, but was best known for writing the BAFTA-nominated Fat Friends, which starred her actress daughter Gaynor Faye. A spokesperson for her TV production company, Roland Productions, announced she died on Sunday, saying, "We've lost a phenomenal talent." She was 71. The Queen has made a surprise appearance at London Paddington Station today, officially opening the completed Elizabeth line named in her honour. The 96-year-old monarch was joined by her youngest son, Prince Edward, who was due to board a train and head to Tottenham Court Road, marking the completion of London's Crossrail. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing. Something Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey may have ringing in his head today. Having told MPs that on top of an energy crisis, there's a looming food crisis, the man in charge of money has to now manage the big old mess we're in, or should have managed it better. What went wrong? First, the pandemic shuts the global economy down. The government gave people cash to go on buying things, printing more money. The fine balance between oil supply and demand also saw prices plummet as global supply chains ground to a halt. But as things opened up, too much money was about the place, meaning prices got higher, while oil and gas also soared. Yet those vital supply chains are still pretty screwed. As a result, we have soaring inflation. Now, the normal way to manage that is to get people to spend less and save more by putting interest rates up. Now there's war between Russia and Ukraine, with Putin able to fund his evil with the high cost of oil, is also hitting the world's supply of food, especially basics like wheat and cooking oil. And it's hard to get people to spend less when prices are on the rise, so things quickly get out of control. A cost of living crisis is born, and the poorest are the hardest hit. The problem is, the government faces a horrible dilemma. Giving people more money to help might only fan the flames. And as things get worse and businesses struggle, the economy will stall, meaning stagflation, a toxic cocktail indeed. So what is the medicine? Well, it's a bitter pill to swallow. The more the government helps, the worse things could get. A message no Prime Minister wants to give, while coulda, woulda, shoulda is something no government wants to hear. Well, let's discuss this with Andy Mayer, Energy and Infrastructure Analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Peter Edward, former editor of Labour List, an independent website that's supportive of the Labour Party. Andy, I'm going to start with you. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. What could the government have done differently? Or can we really just say, well, it's Putin's fault and the war in Ukraine?
Well, certainly that's really important. And what the government had control over was the supply of money going into this crisis. So if you want to stop inflation, you shouldn't be doing quantitative easing or printing money. in order to try and stimulate the economy when it didn't need stimulating. But fundamentally, all inflation relates to that. But the underlying crisis is a supply shock. So we've had the supply shock of the pandemic return, people coming back, spending more money, supply chains adjusting across the world to that. And we had the shock of the Ukraine war, which has been particularly important in respect of energy prices. We have a regional gas market and wheat prices because the Ukraine and Russia are responsible for about 30% of world trade. And clearly those things are beyond the government's control. But they could have prepared for some of these things a bit better. Domestically, for example, they could have ended the moratorium on fracking in 2019, which means that we'd have more local supplies. They could have built up gas reserves, which means they would be able to control more of what we're putting on the market locally during the winter. So the things they could have done, but the things they didn't do, they essentially left themselves vulnerable to the movements of global markets over which they have no control.
I mean, Peter, would you broadly agree with that, you know, the government have been caught napping perhaps, or they could have been better prepared, put things away for a rainy day, fuel, for example, energy reserves, or do you think it goes deeper than that?
Well, I think we have heard quite a common sense analysis, but of course it does go deeper, because if you look at the contributors to the cost of living crisis, that's a national insurance contribution rise, so a tax rise, petrol's increasing, household energy bills, food, and of course the cost of a mortgage. Now the Bank of England base rate has risen. On the face of it, those could sound like terribly unfortunate force majeure that come out of nowhere, but lots of them do go back to government action or inaction, as we've just heard, because if you don't invest in your energy infrastructure, for example, or build up your gas reserves, then the cost goes up, or the price goes up, and you become more dependent on overseas nations. Similarly, if you don't invest in your food capacity, you become reliant on other countries. And obviously, you know, there used to be this great phrase of America that if America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Well, we're seeing that in Ukraine, a horrific war, but Ukraine is such a big grain producer that the economic impact of that is beyond just Ukraine, Russia and oil. It's grain as well. So food prices are going to carry on going up. And we had what was described as an apocalyptic scenario from the Bank of England governor yesterday. So I feel very strongly that all the driving factors of inflation, which is going to hit 10%, are not force majeure. They go back to government inaction.
Now, Andy, the Queen's speech is being debated in Parliament today through the prism of the cost of living crisis, with opposition benches saying there should be an emergency budget, and perhaps that emergency budget should include a windfall tax. Are those things that you'd support? I mean, what can the government do to help? Or would direct intervention and potentially pumping more money into people's pockets actually make things worse?
Well, you don't help a cost of living crisis by increasing taxes. The government is perfectly capable of riding out this storm. It's the individual households, particularly the most vulnerable, those on the margin, just outside the benefit system, that are having the most difficulty. The windfall tax they're referring to specifically is on the North Sea. And that's a bit of a puzzle because there's already a windfall tax on the North Sea. It's 40%, whereas the rest of the country paid 19% for their corporation tax. So that's going to raise about £21 billion between 2021 and 2025, and the government could spend that in any which way they see fit. Labour's proposal on this was about £6 to £7 billion. So already the money that we know is coming in, which wasn't expected, is there. So let's hear what the politicians want to do with that, not silly ideas about new taxes.
And Peter, I mean, if we're not going to raise taxes and hit people hard, how on earth can the country afford to help people out right now?
Well, that's a very good question, but I think the government, they've initially said no to a windfall tax, and now they seem not sure. They initially said they were open to an emergency budget, then the Treasury ruled it out. Now it seems like they're not sure. So I would say the government is not in control of events. And it is very hard to mitigate the cost of living crisis when it's 10 or 12 years in the making, going back to all the supply side problems we've just been discussing. But Labour's example, perhaps the most prominent one today, is the windfall tax. And that is estimated that would knock around £200 off typical household energy bills. Labour also said it wouldn't proceed with the rise in national insurance in the short term. And Labour's also spoken out for many years about the rate of universal credit, where it's argued that should go up at a slightly higher rate. And remember, people from all sorts of walks of society receive universal credit. It might be someone out of work, or it might be someone in work on low pay, and we should be supporting all these groups. But there's a few quick actions: universal credit, household energy bills that would provide immediate support.
Now, in terms of what the Bank of England have said yesterday, Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey basically warning of apocalyptic food prices. I mean, how bad are things going to get? Are we looking back at an era much like the 1970s where stagflation really comes home to roost? Or can we be hopeful that this could potentially come to an end soon? Peter, that's to you, sorry.
Yeah, well, if you're asking me, I suspect, sadly, we're in stagflation now. So that's basically a stagnant economy and rising inflation. I say that because, and Andy will know much better than me, there's always a time lag in economic data. So every announcement, and they tend to be quite unpleasant announcements that we get on the radio or TV first thing in the morning, are telling us what happened over the last 3 to 6 months. So I suspect we're in stagflation now, which is very bad. Forecast is inflation will hit 10%. That worries me. And lots of the things we're talking about are going to hit the poorest people hardest. So say if someone is a GP or a civil servant with children but in a double income household, they'll feel a bit of pressure, but they can ride it out. But if you're, say, a single parent, or you're working part-time, say in a coffee shop or a nursery nurse, or you're a single person who's retired and you've just got your pension to survive on, you'll be hit a lot more harsher basis by all the things we're talking about. So it's important to remember that although it's become almost a cliche because you hear it so much, but there really is a choice between heating and eating for some people. And that's why we need government action, not just for the whole economy, that actually targets people in quite desperate situations, because it's going to get worse before it gets better.
And Andy, I mean, there's been a lot of messaging coming out of sort of sides of the government saying it's time that people tightened their belts, that perhaps they work longer hours, they deploy some sensible home economics when it comes to how they feed the family. I mean, is that right? Is that really the message that they should be giving, or should the government be doing more to help the situation?
Well, just to go back to what Peter said, he's dead right that cutting NIC, the taxes that the government have control over, is the right thing to do. He's dead right that you deal with short-term high prices in energy and the cost of living going up for the most vulnerable through the welfare system. Both those things would really help. The government and some of the MPs who are currently making very silly comments about how to deal with things they themselves do not have to deal with on a daily basis on their much higher salaries, they should look at home. They should look at what in the government's portfolio they can actually cut back on, that they do not need to spend money on. For example, if we look at the headlines today about fuel prices, the biggest component of fuel prices is tax. It's usually between 50 to 70% of a litre at the pump. Now, the government is currently, one of the MPs is saying that the 1 to 2p extra profit some of the companies making is outrageous. Well, they're making 80 to 85p. That's something they could cut immediately. They should stop putting VAT on top of fuel duty so they double tax what people are paying. And these are people who are driving vans, getting shopping from the warehouses to people working and living at home. And so it goes on. So the government is usually quite hypocritical on this. There are loads of things they have control of it in their own portfolio. And they yet seem to prefer attacking large companies, attacking the public. They need to stop doing that and need to focus on getting their own house in order.
Andy, Peter, great to actually hear left and right actually agreeing on some stuff there as well. Fascinating stuff, a really interesting debate. Thank you both for coming on the programme. Andy Mayer and Peter Edwards. Well, joining me today is journalist and political commentator Benedict Spence. I'm not good at economics. It's a lot to wrap my poor little girly brain around. But, I mean, do you agree that, you know, it should be about cutting, not in terms of austerity, but cutting national insurance, cutting taxes, help through the welfare system, yet cut VAT on fuel?
Yeah, it's about getting more money into people's pockets without giving them money that doesn't currently exist. So not printing more money, it's about cutting taxes. And there are all sorts of ways, as Andy was just saying there, that the government does have control over, even if it cannot control global events. Things like fuel duty, also taxes on things like farmers, because we're talking about, you know, the rawest of the raw in terms of what it is that we're producing, what's being knocked onto the consumers. Putting food on the table is a very real concern for a lot of people, probably much more than energy is during the height of the summer. Well, how can you do that? You can alleviate a lot of the struggles that farmers currently face, given that a lot of them actually live a fairly subsistent existence as it is. That would be one of the main things that I would have thought. But, you know, this is going to take bold leadership, actually. And it's the one thing really we don't seem to have in this government, is that it doesn't appear to know what direction it wants to go in. But what we will need, I'm afraid, as Andy said, is that we will need to cut back on some things. But that will require the public coming to terms with the fact that the government will not be able to spend money on things that we have all started to take for granted. I mean, one of the interesting things, wasn't it, was that national insurance increases were going to go towards care for the elderly and that sort of thing. It's perhaps time that as a nation we started to look at the amount of contributions that working people make towards, you know, the keeping of relatively wealthier pensioners, and saying, perhaps is it the time that those people started for paying for more of this sort of things themselves? Perhaps actually can we afford things like free bus passes? And I understand a lot of people turn around and say, I've worked my whole life, X, Y, Z, I deserve a little bit. Yes, but circumstances do change. And actually, if we are all in this situation together, that does mean a lot of other people having to tighten their belts as well, who perhaps feel they've already done enough. And if you want an example of why this is very important, you know, you were talking about the Governor of the Bank of England talking about catastrophic food shortages. Right now in Kenya, 3.5 million people need aid today. The government of Sri Lanka has collapsed in the last week because people cannot afford food. People are starving. We've already seen in Morocco, one of the most stable countries in Africa, food-related riots. That's also happening in the Middle East as well. A lot of people will say these are third world countries. This is on the other side of the world. That is where the contagion starts. Without smart and reactive, proactive, government, it will spread to Europe. It'll spread to Eastern Europe. It'll spread to the Balkans. It'll spread to the Mediterranean, and then upwards. This isn't a situation that we can just twiddle our thumbs over. It requires action now, and it requires boldness. And I fear we don't actually have the government that's able to do that.
Benedict, wow, strong words there. Fascinating. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, the Queen makes a surprise visit to the brand new Elizabeth line in London, while Charles and Camilla visit Canada. We'll have a royal roundup. It's time for a short break. Do remember, you can let us know your thoughts on what we've just discussed today. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think it's give and take? The government should cut taxes, but we also need to tighten our belts. And do you think this is the government that can lead us through what could be a really big crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 1970s? Do get in touch. We're going to have a little break now and a check on the weather forecast. I'm back soon.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather outlook. A warm, sunny day for many places today. In the west, though, it's a different story. Much more cloud here with the potential for some pretty heavy showers, especially later on. There's a big area of low pressure out west. It's not really moving very far, but it's throwing up this weather front, which is just going to drape itself across parts of Northern Ireland, West Wales, Western Scotland, the far southwest of England. So in this zone, quite a lot of cloud and at times some showers, which will turn heavy, particularly later on. For many central and eastern parts, though, it is a fine day. Plenty of warm, hazy sunshine out there. A few coasts, particularly in the far northeast, staying a little misty. And if we keep that mist or ha, temperatures will struggle. But in the sunshine, a very warm one, 24, 25, maybe 26 across parts of the southeast. Cooler with the wetter weather further west, which will get pretty heavy this evening for Wales and especially Northern Ireland. Some downpours here. That rain spreads across much of Scotland through this evening. The risk of some heavy showers and even some lightning across East Anglia and the southeast through the evening. But you can see it all shifts away pretty rapidly to the north. So for many of us, most of the night will be dry once we've lost those evening downpours. Temperatures down to 10 or 11 Celsius in most towns and cities. Another fine day for quite a few of us on Wednesday. A few showers through the night and early on across the far northwest of Scotland and for Northern Ireland, but they also tend to zip away. And a brighter day generally for Northern Ireland tomorrow. West Wales, southwest England, more sunshine. And for most it is a day of hazy sunshine and, although not as warm as today, still pretty warm. Temperatures widely in the high teens or low 20s, maybe 24 across the southeast. Again, a little cooler around some coasts. And again, the potential later on for some heavy rain to come into Northern Ireland and the risk of thunderstorms drifting up from France over parts of England and Wales, and the potential for some really heavy ones for a time through tomorrow evening across East Anglia and the southeast. Bye for now.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, the Queen made a surprise appearance to officially open the completed Elizabeth line, named in her honour. London's Crossrail will link the east and the west of the capital with faster journey times to Heathrow. GB News London reporter Alice Porter.
The Queen took everyone by surprise when she suddenly appeared at Paddington Station. People may have complained about the delayed Crossrail project, but it was all smiles as Boris Johnson and the Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, welcomed the monarch and her youngest son. Her Majesty looked round the station entrance to the Elizabeth line, which has been appropriately designed in royal purple. She also met train drivers and station staff and unveiled a plaque to mark the completion of the project. The Elizabeth line runs from west to east and officially opens next Tuesday. And should the Queen wish to visit again, she was given her own Oyster payment card. Despite recently struggling with her mobility, the 96-year-old went to the Windsor Horse Show on Friday and on Sunday was the guest of honour at an equestrian event near Windsor. But today is the first engagement that the Queen has been to outside of the Windsor area since she attended the Duke of Edinburgh's memorial service in Westminster Abbey 7 weeks ago. With only 2 weeks to go until the Platinum Jubilee weekend, it seems as if everything is on the right track. Alice Porter.
That was Alice Porter there, and amazing to see the Queen up and about and looking resplendent, may I say. God save the Queen. Well, we're joined by our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who's in Canada for the visit of the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall there. Fantastic to have you on, Cameron. What can we expect from this royal tour? Hopefully less bumpy, perhaps, than some of the previous ones.
Well, good morning, Alex, or good afternoon where you are. I am in Ottawa, and right now Prince Charles and Camilla are flying across the Atlantic to take part in a 3-day royal tour of Canada, and it's to celebrate Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Now, their first stop is going to be Newfoundland, and Prince Charles, in a speech later today, is expected to speak about the Queen's profound affection she feels for Canada and its people. He's also expected to say service to family, community and country is what makes Canada so special and what my family and I have always admired. Well, away from the pomp and ceremony of a royal tour such as this, I think a big theme is going to be reconciliation for Indigenous communities. We know that last year hundreds of children were discovered in mass graves who were lost in the residential school system in Canada in the 19th and 20th centuries. That's led to statues, protests in Canada last year being toppled over of Queen Elizabeth as well as Queen Victoria. We also saw, just earlier this year that protests in the Caribbean when the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge visited the Caribbean and the Earl and Countess of Wessex over calls for the royal family to apologise for their links to the historical slave trades. Now, we know that Prince Charles is not particularly one to shy away from difficult issues. He is expected to attend a memorial service at the Hart Gardens at Government House in Newfoundland later, and perhaps we might see some sort of apology, but that is not confirmed, so that is just speculation and reports. But away from that, he's also going to be visiting local businesses with the Duchess of Cornwall. They're visiting a local fishing village called Kiddivity Village. He's going to be visiting their artisan studios, which supports young craftspeople and artists who are trying to set up their own businesses, and he'll also be sampling a beer from a local brewery which is made using 20,000-year-old water, harvested even from icebergs which have migrated down to Newfoundland. But talking about icebergs, another key theme of this tour is going to be climate change and preserving the planet, and Prince Charles is very keen to learn from Indigenous communities about how their kind of traditional methods could help to allow us to make the world a better place by using sustainable methods of food production and things like that. He'll be travelling to Ottawa, where I am tomorrow, to meet business leaders to try and kind of speak about a kind of more sustainable economy and greener economy. The Duchess of Cornwall will also be highlighting issues close to her heart, including children's literacy. She'll also be visiting a refuge centre for women who have suffered domestic violence. Now, there'll be a big Platinum Jubilee celebration as well in Ottawa, and they'll be engaging lots of different communities, because for Prince Charles, as future King of Canada, he'll kind of need to engage these local communities in order to preserve the monarchy and the Commonwealth for future generations.
Indeed, Cameron Walker. I'm pleased to see it's looking a bit drizzly in Canada while we're basking in sunshine here in London. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, we're crossing live to Northern Ireland and talking to political grandee Baroness Kate Hoey about the protocol as Liz Truss gets tough over post-Brexit trade. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon. It is 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Foreign Secretary has set out plans to rewrite Britain's post-Brexit trading agreement, changing the rules on how goods enter Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. Liz Truss said the political deadlock in Northern Ireland was very serious and that immediate action was needed to allow power sharing to resume its Stormont. The DUPs refused to enter government unless the existing Northern Ireland protocol is scrapped. Finland's parliament has approved a proposal to apply for NATO membership. Sweden has also made a formal bid to apply to join the alliance, but it hasn't yet been approved. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted the Nordic states to re-evaluate their security. Both countries need each of NATO's 30 members to approve their applications. Volunteer police officers will be given the power to use tasers under new plans by the Home Secretary. There are nearly 9,000 special constables in England and Wales who undertake the same duties as regular police officers. The Home Office says the measures will ensure volunteers are not at a disadvantage when facing a knife-wielding attacker or a terror threat. The founder of a far-right terror group whose members plotted to carry out deadly attacks has been found guilty of involvement with the organisation. The 27-year-old Alex Davies set up the group National Action and continued to associate with them after it was banned by the government in 2016. 19 other members have also been convicted. The Queen has made a surprise appearance at London Paddington Station today to officially open the now completed Elizabeth line that's been named in her honour. The 96-year-old monarch was joined by her youngest son, Prince Edward, who is due to board a train and head to Tottenham Court Road, marking the completion of the Crossrail project. You're up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.25 to the dollar, the pound is 1.18 to the euro, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,464.62 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And so she's finally done it. Well, partly. The Foreign Secretary says she is unilaterally binning the dodgiest parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, with legislation coming into force within weeks. It should be music to the ears of the DUP, who have refused to restore the power-sharing agreement in Northern Ireland unless the PM called Brussels bluff, who, of course, threatened a trade war, bleating about international law if the UK made such a move. But will they now act on their threats? When even The Guardian are reporting the boss of M&S telling Radio 4 that the government's plans were sensible. Well, you know this ain't Brexit bluster. Apparently, lorries carrying goods need 700 pages of documentation, taking 8 hours to prepare, with huge tracts needing to be in Latin and a specific typeface. Oh, it's hard to claim Brussels weren't deliberately trying to make things difficult. Well, the ball is now in the EU's court. The Foreign Secretary set out plans to rewrite Britain's post-Brexit trading agreement earlier in the Commons, and here's what she had to say.
This is not about scrapping the protocol. Our aim is to deliver on the protocol's objectives. We will cement those provisions which are working in the protocol, including the common travel area, the single electricity market, and North-South cooperation, whilst fixing those elements that aren't, on the movement of goods, goods regulation, VAT, subsidy control, and governance.
Well, let's go to our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie in Belfast. Doogie, fantastic to be talking to you again, and possibly fantastic news for the DUP.
Well, I don't know that it is. The DUP aren't going to move on this until they actually see it in action. It was funny that Gareth Robertson, the MP for East Belfast, Gavin, said that the question that he asked is, when will we see this legislation coming through? He didn't ask anything else about the legislation, so he was looking for a timescale for when the government were going to act and how long it was going to take, because this could take 9 months. But I think it was as predictable a statement as the reaction has been from it. You talked there about the amount of paperwork that it took. Back in November, we were reporting on generic drugs in Northern Ireland and how hard it was to get those drugs. It took 4 months to get that negotiated through so as we could have generic drugs the same as the rest of the UK. Now we find out that veterinary generic drugs aren't on that list. So that will all have to be renegotiated and gone on again and again. And anybody that is even looking at this protocol say problems have to be sorted out, I think that is turning into total pettiness. So it is obvious that something had to be done. The people in Belfast here realise that it has to be done. I don't think they care if it's scrapped or not, but the DUP will be happy with the stuff around taxation, governance, again that is the ECJ, and of course the common travel area. That is going to cause problems in the next few months here because Irish citizens have been able to travel in and out of the UK as freely as they want since the 70s, when we were all outside the EU it worked and we were all inside the EU it worked. Now that we're not, it's not so good. That will leave Northern Ireland as a dumping ground for everybody that wants to live in the UK but cannot get into England, Scotland or Wales. They've just come in through Dublin, travel up over a non-existent border and come into the UK. So stuff like that is extremely important that was overlooked in the protocol. The European Courts of Justice will satisfy the loyalists and of course having the same taxation as the rest of the UK, and more importantly, probably most importantly, is the subsidies. That means that farming in Northern Ireland can operate the same as the rest of the UK without being held under those EU regulations. You'll see she mentioned about dual production lines, one for GB, one for the EU. If that comes across, that is a golden ticket for business in Northern Ireland. If the EU stand on that, it will probably bring us back to where we were in the first place. So a mixed bag for Northern Ireland. The DUP will be waiting to see if it goes ahead. We do believe Brandon Lewis is on his feet at the moment and he will be looking at the legislation in and around legacy issues. That immediately will cause more of a row in Northern Ireland than anything else. That's the soldiers that keep getting brought back to the courts behind me to stand trial for things that happened maybe 50 years ago. So I will be keeping an eye on that. On the protocol, I await to see this evening exactly what the political fallout is from that, but I would believe that it is going to go down the lines of nationalism and unionism. Very, very predictable.
Dougie Beattie, our Northern Ireland reporter, thank you so much for that comprehensive report. Well, Benedict, that's a lot to wrap your head around, isn't it? But, I mean, the ball is now back in the EU's court. Liz Truss said we tried to negotiate this. We wanted to do this bilaterally. We wanted to solve these problems together. It's clear what some of the issues were. And the EU appeared to really be digging their heels in. So she said, I'm going ahead anyway.
Yeah, it's always so very difficult when it comes to the issue of Northern Ireland, but I can't help but feel that there are so many missed opportunities here, actually, for a degree of reconciliation between the UK and the EU over Northern Ireland. As Dougie just said, there are possibilities that some agreements could be made that created quite a beneficial situation for Northern Ireland, because we do need to remember it is the most impoverished part, sort of per head of the UK, and were it to become part of the Republic of Ireland, it would by far be the most impoverished part of the Republic of Ireland as well. There are many opportunities that could be got for creating sort of a special status around it, which didn't mean that it was subject entirely to the whims of Brussels, which a significant proportion of the population do not want. But it does just seem to be this incredibly sort of intransigent, no, we have to be very ideologically rigid, from, especially from the EU. What I thought was very interesting was, of course, a couple of weeks ago, Emmanuel Macron started touting this idea of reform within Europe where you might have different levels of integration, different sort of layers of Europe, almost different tiers, if you like. And part of me thought, well, that's interesting because it opens up the possibility of places like Northern Ireland and other countries existing within the sphere of influence of the EU, but not having to be part of it, not having to be subject to all of its rules. So there is clearly, within the EU itself, there is the potential for that sort of reform. It's the sort of reform that we weren't getting in 2016, which was why we left sort of in the build-up to the referendum, because there was absolutely no chance of that happening. But clearly, as much as there is that feeling in Brussels that they do have to be very firm on this, I think events in Europe and the changing in polls of what's important, I think that might be beginning to chip away at some ideas of what is in the EU's best interest. And I do have some optimism that long-term, actually a sensible solution can be reached, because the alternative is, as we've seen, gridlock, it's anger, it's disillusionment, and Northern Ireland does not particularly deal well with that historically when there is that degree of dissatisfaction in government.
Well, here's hoping you're right, but reform isn't a word that the EU tend to enjoy.
No, it's not.
Benedict, thanks. Well, the founder of a far-right terror group whose members plotted to carry out deadly attacks, has been found guilty of involvement with the organisation. 27-year-old Alex Davis set up National Action 9 years ago and continued to associate with the group and its offshoot organisations after it was banned by the government in 2016. The conviction of Davis, who's from Swansea, is the latest in a raft of 19 prosecutions of those who continued their membership of the group after it was outlawed. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, takes a look at the background to this case.
Deep in this woodland in Wiltshire, these far-right extremists are seen training for the race war they were determined to spark. Members of the banned terror group National Action, who continued to meet, plot and spread their hateful ideology long after the group was outlawed by the government. Walking past the camera is the group's founder, Alex Davis, about to start boxing with another young extremist who went on to join the police. Davis was still a teenager when he set up National Action in 2013, focusing his attentions on recruiting the young and the impressionable.
Turn away, Alex.
Within a few short years, the group had reached national prominence, staging sometimes violent protests in support of a neo-Nazi ideology. They specifically targeted university campuses and town centres, like here in Bath, where Alex Davis got more than he bargained for when he was confronted by an angry mother.
My daughter's mixed race. Come on. Should she be booted out?
I don't know. She looks white to me.
She is not. She is mixed race.
Now Davis has been found guilty of continued association with National Action and various offshoot organisations set up to try to circumvent a government ban after the group was outlawed in 2016. It is the culmination of a multi-year investigation by counter-terrorism detectives.
Alex Davis held these views, these abhorrent views of a race war, of white supremacy, of harking back to Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s, things that most right-minded people in this country find completely against everything they stand for.
In total, 19 people have now been convicted for their membership of National Action, including Alice Cutter, whose adoration of the Nazis was so profound she even entered a Miss Hitler beauty pageant and spoke of gassing synagogues. Her boyfriend, Mark Jones, was jailed for 5.5 years for his involvement in the group. And Metropolitan Police Officer Ben Hannum, who posted this picture of himself with a Hitler moustache to fellow extremists.
No, it's my design. I got that torch.
Even as he applied to join the police, he was still meeting regularly with the group, training, posting flyers and spray painting their logo on buildings. The organisation also recruited members of the military, like Mikko Vehviläinen, a Lance Corporal with the Royal Anglian Regiment, jailed for 8 years. Jack Renshaw was jailed for life for a plot to murder the Labour MP Rosie Cooper. And Jack Coulson, who was just 17 when he was convicted of constructing a pipe bomb.
Those individuals within National Action were incredibly dangerous. And the ideology they espoused was an ideology of hatred, which caused division in communities across the country.
A common factor with almost all of Alex Davis's National Action recruits was their youth, either in their teens or early 20s.
He very much had worked out how to target the propaganda element of the recruiting process at young people, and how to make the most of the internet and how to make the most of memes to spread that message, and also to take that message out into the communities he was aiming at.
Hey, right, who's going to volunteer go first?
Almost a decade after National Action was formed, founder Alex Davis and many of its members are now behind bars. Islamist extremism is still by far the most potent threat the country faces. But authorities say far-right extremism remains a key and growing concern. Mark White, GB News.
Well, harrowing stuff there, and some of that footage having been released by the police showing what that group indeed has been up to over the past years. Well, now, the Queen just walked up to Paddington to open Crossrail looking like a resplendent daffodil, with a blue twill thing in her hat giving a nod to Ukraine. Her Majesty's outfits almost always carry messages, and so I find myself rummaging through my work wardrobe, trying to do the same. A nice Brexit party Pantone when I'm about to give the EU a kicking, bright blue on the day Finland said they wanted to join NATO, and a particular dress my producers know as the Kremlin Terror. So today, the choice was obvious, because who better to celebrate than the greatest icon of them all? Well, apparently, Brits are the worst at getting back to work, leading the world when it comes to demanding to do their jobs from their sofas. So many people lurking in their lounges also spells disaster for the economy, which is already in a right old mess. Poor old Jacob Rees-Mogg has been trying to scare the people actually running the country back into offices, but is having little luck. Apparently, more than half of Brits would rather quit their jobs than go to the office, with women leading the charge. Now, here's a thought. Maybe if the government cut childcare costs and stuck creches in offices, it would help. As much as I love him, I wouldn't expect a man in his 50s who still has the same nanny to get that. Now, on the matter of parenting, I suddenly find myself agreeing with the Duke of Montecito, who has said he doesn't want his kids using social media. Oh, it's rare that the Ginger Whinger extols small c conservative pragmatism, but he told the launch of a global child online safety toolkit, "My kids are too young to have experienced the online world yet, and I hope that they never have to experience it as it exists now. No kid should have to." Too right. And if social media is responsible for one particularly harrowing development, it's trying to brainwash kids into joining the cult of trans. TikTok and Instagram are awash with creepy propaganda, encouraging youngsters to bind their breasts or even hack them off, question their identity, and enter a world of psychological illness that once upon a time affected only 0.0002% of the population. But you would think it now blights a third of the current generation. And now, this frankly dangerous trans trend is being lapped up by the fashion world, such as in that Calvin Klein advert, and by the BBC, who repeatedly used Doctor Who as an ongoing woke campaign. Look, nobody is saying trans people should be discriminated against, but glorifying a condition that results in children getting life-changing medical procedures by making it look all lovely and fashionable is just plain perverted. Now, apparently, a quarter of us prefer our pets to our partners because they don't judge. Well, based on that, I'm definitely at risk of my other half creating a stronger bond with my little cat, Mog. And who could blame him? She tolerates him accidentally dropping tea bags on her head, shutting her out of the bedroom at night, ending 4 years of snuggling up to me, condemning her to the bath mat. And she always comes back for more when he winds her up, trying to make her stand on her back legs, little paws flailing like a cute Tyrannosaurus. And yet, despite being the one who raised her from birth, who feeds her and always gives her unlimited privileges, it's him she's obsessed with. Well, perhaps when I'm at work, she watches GB News and is appalled by her mother's strident views. Well, still in the studio is journalist and political commentator Benedict Spence. Anything you want to get your teeth into from that array?
I could go for all of that. I mean, the first thing is I don't believe that pets are less judgmental than partners. Speaking from personal experience, my cat has nothing but contempt for me. Be it political views, be it outfits. Genuinely, it just looks at me the whole time, just going, "I despise you." But I mean, if we want to talk about more serious things, and not that that's not serious, of course. Pets are very important, but things like wanting to get back to the office and all that. When we're talking about a cost of living crisis, which is affecting people very profoundly, I do think we need to bear in mind, as much as people will say, well, it might affect productivity, it affects sort of working environments. For a lot of people on a sort of an individual basis, a lot of people have very long commutes and they spend a lot of money on commuting as well. And especially, as you pointed out there, women with young children who have to sort of juggle the cost of childcare and the time of sort of taking your time out of going to work via a creche, via a nursery, whatever it is, that can all become incredibly taxing. And so I do think we need to approach this with a degree of understanding that for a lot of people, staying at home isn't necessarily the thing that they want to do. It might just be the most cost-effective thing for them in order to, sort of be able to make sure that their children are looked after, make sure that they have enough time to, say, cook for their children, that sort of thing, and also be able to get their work done. And if you're sort of commuting half an hour here, 45 minutes there, it might not seem that bad, but actually it all does add up. And I think that's something that we need to bear in mind if people are struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah, now an issue that is always controversial, that I've got very strong opinions on, is, of course, what I consider to be the glorification of trans rights or trans activism. And, I mean, every time you talk about this, you get accused of being a transphobe. But my point is, it's one thing persecuting people or making people feel unwelcome in society. It's quite another when you feel that it's being forced upon people. And there are so many young people today questioning their gender, and surely that is something that we should worry about as a public health concern.
Well, I'm not an expert on the origins of transgenderism. I wouldn't pretend to be, but I do think that it's very noticeable that there is a lot of conversation around this, and the fact that unlike other things, unlike other phenomena, this is something that appears to be spread via mimesis. This is something that is actually spread via behaviour, that once one person starts behaving in a certain way, it is mimicked by other people, and social media does help with that. Now, that can that can be seen in things like fashion trends. It can be seen in things like political views. These things are spread by mimesis. It can also be seen in things like self-harm. That's actually spread in a very similar way, which is why people very rightly get upset by people posting self-harm content on things like Instagram. It's a similar sort of thing that can happen. Not in all cases. Lots of people, for a lot of people, that isn't how it happens. But we've seen an explosion in this as a phenomenon. And it's not all because these people have historically been living very oppressed, repressed lives. It is because of the spread of certain patterns of behaviour, certain mimicry, that sort of thing. And that is something to bear in mind. And I think it does befall all of us. And it's interesting, of course, that you mentioned Prince Harry talking about social media. Parents do need to be very aware of this when it comes. This isn't one of those sort of you need to be careful about dangerous video games and TV, but you do just need to be aware that this is how ideas, movements, trends spread, both beneficial and negative as well.
Do you know what's been beneficial and not negative at all is having you on the programme. You are wonderful. Thank you so much, Benedict Spence. That's all I've got time for today. We need to talk about it on GB News is back same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. First, though, let's have a little look at the weather. It's hot down here.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. There's warm sunshine in the forecast, but also heavy showers and thunderstorms. It must be almost summer. Here's the bigger picture. You can see a swirl of cloud on the satellite image, an area of low pressure that's kind of hanging out here and allowing warmer air to waft up from the south, but introducing the moisture with these weather fronts, and that combination of moisture and warmth will trigger some heavy downpours. Mostly across western areas this evening, torrential rain possible, particularly western Scotland, Northern Ireland, but also a few flashes of lightning possible across East Anglia and the southeast as some heavy showers move through. But they are zipping through, so most places actually dry from midnight onwards. We'll keep some showers going in the northwest and temperatures mostly holding up in double figures. On to Wednesday, and for most places, it's going to be a fine day. Yes, some showers, certainly early on over western